it boggles your mind when you start to think about this whole story of dinosaurs. I mean, what really happened? How are people, recently talking about seeing dinosaurs and encountering dragons and stuff like that? Why are they so worshipped more than anything else? The dragons and all this dragon culture and mythology is everywhere. So we're going to get into that here. So now let's get right into this whole thing. I have a lot of information. Now, the thing is, I really want you to think it's dinosaurs. I really want you to think about dinosaurs and everything that entails. All the information that we have gotten over the years about dinosaurs. Really get into that. Now, when you think dragons, think dinosaurs. The problem is when most people, think about dinosaurs, they believe dinosaurs are these, beasts, these reptiles that existed millions of years ago before, mankind. And we read stories about, dragons and, dragon slayers and the knights versus the dragons, slaying the dragon to save the princess, all this and that is always found in mythology. And we are led to believe that dragons are these mythological beasts that existed a long time ago. And dinosaurs existed millions of years ago. And people think that they are just two separate species. You got a dragon species and you got dinosaurs, and they are totally separate from each other. For the most part, that is what people think when they think about the two. So now understand, it wasn't until 1824 that we get the word reptile. It wasn't until 1842 that Richard Owens gives us the name dinosaur. So we're talking about 1842, fairly recent in history, that we finally get the name dinosaur. Think about that. Now, dinosaur means great lizard. So 1763 is when the first official writings of what we call today dinosaur was recorded. 1763. So when they recorded these writings, they wasn't even calling it dinosaur then, because the name didn't come until much later. So when you look at all the ancient stories and depictions about dragons and all these stories about dragons, when you look at all this stuff, before the 1800s, when you look at the pictures and the depictions, these dragons look like dinosaurs in most of the accounts. Now, the thing is, before they was called dinosaurs by, Richard Owen and everybody else, they called them dragons. So think about this. This changes everything. When you understand that before dinosaurs was called dinosaurs, they called them dragons. So think about the mythology. So we're going to say that dinosaurs are real and actually existed, and they called them dragons. And then we find all of this mythology and all these stories and tales about dragons. When you have the Chinese put the dragon on the zodiac, everything else on that Chinese zodiac, as I showed, is real. And we are to believe that the dragon is mythological. And you have all these prominent people writing about dragons and seeing these things. When you finally understand that they called them dragons before dinosaurs, everything changes. How many people know that? It's some reason why they want to cover this up. We're going to get into that, because you have to think that, well, wait a minute. If they called them dragons before dinosaurs, then what about all these stories that we are reading and finding about dragons? So we're going to get into that. So now this gives validity to all of the ancient stories and depictions. And understand, they have found so many depictions of men walking with dinosaurs. A lot of ancient depictions of men talking about dinosaurs and walking with dinosaurs. These people drew the dinosaurs. How the hell could they draw a dinosaur, so long ago, when we didn't really start discovering fossils until the 1800s? They wasn't even written about till the 1700s. So if you find depictions, drawings of a dinosaur before that, that should tell you something. That basically is proof positive that men walked with dinosaurs or dragons. It's proof. So then you have to go back and look at these stories and say, well, it's truth to it. But the big question is, why would they lie and tell us that dinosaurs existed millions of years before us and they died out because of some meteor and this and that? And the whole question now becomes, when you think about it, okay, if men walk with these dinosaurs or dragons, somehow they became extinct. They're gone. So what happened that killed off these huge dinosaurs, killed them off, but left us alive? And that's something I was getting into in part 2. We know it's recorded that some kind of cataclysmic event took place that wiped out a lot of people and perhaps the dinosaurs, and anything that was small enough to survive underground, lived. Is it possible there could have been some dinosaurs that survived underground? Yes, we're going to get into that later because that's huge. But think about it. How could something wipe them out and not us? And we got to really, really dig into that question. But the real point I'm trying to make is, why cover it up? Why not just tell us, hey, yeah, we existed with these dinosaurs until something happened? They hid the truth for a reason. And when you get into everything that goes along with this, then it gives more validity to this whole reptilian story. It's something that you really have to study, is your dragon mythology and everything that we have on dinosaurs. So understand that a lot of these stories are old. This whole thing goes back a long time about dragons, and it's been so well hidden from, the public. It's not been put out there on the forefront as being fact, just stories that people have found. If you read archaeologist books and you start reading books by paleontologists and they start talking about these stories and the comparison between these dragons and dinosaurs, then you start to understand, and then you realize that, well, wait a minute, this book is dated 1800s, or this book is dated, 1920 or 1930. It's like, well, wait a minute, these stories have been around for a long time and we never heard about them, about the comparison between the dragons and these dinosaurs, and all the stories, the mythologies we are told, but the stories of what's going on. These people wrote about this stuff. So now I want you to start thinking about these first stories being like, religious stories, the first religious stories, or a religious story of some sort. When you start to read a lot of the stories, you always find that the people sacrifice lambs to the dragon. That's one of the most common things you're going to find, sacrificing lambs to the dragon. There's a story from Krakow, Poland, about the Valval dragon. You have a man named Scuba who basically took a lamb and he stuffed it with sulfur and he sacrificed it to the dragon. The dragon eats the lamb and it kills him. So this is a story they wrote about. It's another version of this story about King Krakus, his 2 sons. He had his sons go out and basically slay this dragon. The problem is they argued about who would get the credit for killing this dragon, because they knew only one of them could be king. So Leech, or Lek, the one son, kills his brother Krakius II, and he blames it on the dragon, and he becomes king and he assumes the throne. Now, later the truth comes out and they banish him. Now, the thing is, they actually have a statue of this Valval dragon. It's called Valval dragon. They pronounce their W's with a V sound. They have this statue there in Krakow, Poland. And the reason why it's called Krakow is supposed to be named after Krakius II, pronounced Krakow. So it's a lot of dragon stories out there, a lot of dragon mythology, but you're always going to find lambs being sacrificed to these dragons. So they had to sacrifice these lambs to the dragon because, of course, if they didn't feed them, then the dragons would come deeper into their towns or villages and start eating people or terrorizing. So they sacrificed the lambs to these dragons. So in sacrificing these lambs to the dragons, these lambs became what? Their saviors. So I know it sounds crazy. It's like, oh, come on. Almost sounds corny. I thought so too when I was reading it. So I was like, well, wait a minute. I got to do some more research on this. But when you go and you start researching this, it's everywhere. It's everywhere. It's not far-fetched. It's all over the place of these stories about lambs being sacrificed to these dragons. And it makes sense. Remember, I was talking about in the previous video how the original symbol for Christianity was what? The lamb on the cross. The lamb being the savior. Think about that. So then this also explains why we don't get the image of Christ on the cross until 800 years after the crucifixion. Ever since the first day we are born, our body cells is consistently fighting against this radiation, but it also has to fight against microbes and bacteria and viruses and diseases. So our body cells is continually fighting against these things for our entire life. Now, the deeper you go underground, you are not exposed to any of these things because there's a high concentration, a very high level of negative ions. That is the word of the day, negative ions. Pay attention because this is the main point I want to make in this entire video. What negative ions is. I don't know what you have been told about them, but you have to understand this. Negative ions play a major role in the cycle of nature on this planet, period, point blank. They play a very vital role in our lives. This is something that is not being taught to us. A lot of people remember those bands people used to walk around with, supposed to be, dispersing negative ions, whatever like that. You have to really understand what negative ions is, and we're going to really get into that in this video. But underground, negative ions exist, and what negative ions do is they completely wipe out radiation, microbes, viruses, and everything like that. They cleanse the body so that your body cells can do what they are meant to do. Your body cells, our body cells, are meant to regenerate. Understand, something that regenerates can never die because it keeps regenerating. This is what negative ions is supposed to do. So underground, it's a high concentration of it, and people in theory, and not even in theory, really scientifically proven, will actually live longer with a high concentration of negative ions because your cells will just regenerate. I want you to think about something. I want you to think about stem cell research. The reason why stem cell research works is because they can do these experiments with the stem cells, and the cells have let's say a sterilized environment to work with. Now, when your body cells, as I said, is not fighting anything, they do their job, and that is to regenerate you. So this is why stem cell research work. I also want you to think about cancer patients. When they go get their chemotherapy treatment, what happens is there's a high concentration of radiation, emitted to, the tumor or the cancerous part of their body. And what happens is their body cells, basically come together and fight hard because it has to fight off that radiation. It tries to fight it off. This is why, when they finish the whole treatments, they are completely weak and, they're tired. They start losing their hair because the cells, that's basically holding your strands of hair together have to basically go to the energy used to fight off this bombardment of radiation to your body. So you get weak, you start losing your hair, and they have to use a high concentration of radiation to shrink the tumor. But it takes a toll on your body. And this is why some people don't die from, the cancer. They die from the radiation. And this has been proven. So, our body cells are meant, whoever created us, understand this. Our body cells were meant to basically heal us. And the implications is if your body cells is doing its job, you should be living on this planet for thousands of years. But there are other things that's keeping that from happening we're going to get into in this video. Now, also, I want you to think about trees. Think about the fact that there are some trees that live thousands of years. If a tree is in the right location and has the right supply of resources, we talk about sunlight, a good, channel of water underground that they can tap into, or if it rains a lot in that area, if they can get their roots deep enough, we know trees can live for hundreds and thousands of years. Now, with some researchers in Australia, in Queensland University, in Brisbane, Australia, who did some research on trees and plants that they say, basically was electrifying the atmosphere. Now, listen to this. And this is from Queensland University of Technology. It says, plants have long been known as the lungs of the earth, but a new finding has found they may also play a role in electrifying the atmosphere. Scientists have long suspected an association between trees and electricity, but researchers in Australia think that they have finally discovered the link. The scientists ran experiments in 6 locations around Brisbane. They found the positive and negative ion concentration in the air were twice as high in heavily wooded areas than in open grassy areas such as parks. Now, I want you to understand what this is saying. It is saying that the trees are pulling the negative ions out of the air. They don't really want the positive ions, even though they're going to be there. They want the negative ions because the negative ions is going to sustain them. Now, trees, plants are living things just like we are. So if they're pulling the negative ions out of the air into their atmosphere and using it to sustain themselves and keep themselves, going for years, centuries, millennia in many cases, this is something you need to think about because it's really deep and what's going on. Understand, as I said, this is a natural cycle. This is what's supposed to happen. The negative ions keep them alive. It's that simple. Now, understand the key to this whole thing is water. Water is the key. Now, we're talking about basically the effects of negative ions on the body, and a consistent level of negative ions would sustain the body. We're talking about the fountain of youth here. This is why the fountain of youth, always was a fountain. It had to deal with water because water is the key to this thing. So now you have to have this steady supply, a continuous, infinite supply of negative ions to basically sustain you for, who knows how long. Unless somebody blow your brains out, you would basically, in essence, live forever. So you had this bacteria going from bacteria, into fish eventually, and tadpoles and frogs and lizards to megalodon and T-Rex and Stegosaurus. So, you would think for it to go from, small organisms to more complex organisms to these giants, you would expect to see more giants. Now, they tell us that the atmosphere was so humid and it created the conditions that sustained and created these giant reptiles. But you would still expect to see other giants, on the planet as well. We don't find that. We find these giant dinosaurs, and the whole thing is fishy with that anyway, because we know that they lied to us about dinosaurs from the jump, since we can prove now that dinosaurs and humans did coexist. So the whole timeline is kind of, out of whack, and we really don't know what's going on with that when it's talking about dinosaurs. We know they possibly did exist as long ago as they say, but maybe they all wasn't wiped out the way that they tell us with a meteor and all that, because we know that humans and these dinosaurs coexisted, or humans are much older than they are telling us. So we're not really going to get into that whole thing. The problem is, what I'm getting into here is the evolutionary scale that they give us for us, for humans, for life. So if you had cyanobacteria for 3.5 billion years on its own, on this planet, then all of a sudden evolving into these super complex organisms and these mega giant reptiles, what's up with that? And the thing that really exposes this thing is Pangea. And if you heard of Pangea is basically the landmass that came about, through the formation of the planet or whatever. So basically, at one point, you had this one large landmass called Pangea. So this basically all of the continents connected together was Pangea. Now, Pangea had life. It sustained life. But the problem with Pangea was it had multiple volcanoes. So you had so many volcanoes together erupting simultaneously, and it released a lot of these deadly gases into the atmosphere. It completely changed the Earth's atmosphere, and it wiped out 95% of all life on the planet. Gone. And we know eventually they would separate and we would get our continents and everything like that. But you had 95% of life on Earth wiped out. And then it only took 30 million years for life to start to come back, for the Earth to recover. So how we go from 3.5 billion years of bacteria to basically back to nothing, to no bacteria except for certain locations, but then life recreating itself in 30 million years. The numbers, it don't add up. It shouldn't took so fast. It shouldn't happen so fast for life to recover after that cataclysmic event. So the numbers don't add up. And there's a lot of scientists in agreement on that of what happened for life to recover so fast. So this is why many of us are so hooked on the fact that something was introduced to this planet to create these more complex organisms. Now, Pangea existed 300 million years ago. So, it's separated into the continents we know today. A few times these land masses broke up and separated. The problem is, the dating. And you got to understand, they give us these long, crazy dates, a billion, years of evolution, 100, 600 million years and stuff like that. So we don't really question evolution. And so we can say, well, it takes this amount of time for things to evolve. And this is why we're not seeing evolution. But that don't make any sense when you tell us, 3.5 billion years for bacteria to go from bacteria and to eventually dinosaurs. That's a long time. And then we get life, basically recreating itself in 30 million years. It doesn't fit, especially when you remember that we're talking about under different, atmospheres, different circumstances. So we can say that, okay, well, maybe the, atmosphere sped life up. But if that was the case, then you would expect to see more animals, the evolution of animals in different places. And I'm going to get into that, what I mean by that. But the thing is this, the problem that you would have with this whole thing, this is the problem I have with it because listen, this is something that I spent a lot of years of my life on really digging into all of this, because to me, this is the key. If you want to start with what we getting into now, to me, you have to go here. If you really want to look into all the mystery and everything like that, this should have been the first thing you was looking at. You should have been looking at evolution. You should have been looking at what they tell us. Because my problem with evolution, with the whole thing, no matter how much sense that it made and added up to in a lot of places, is the fact that science tells us that we evolve from cyanobacteria. So we're talking about cyanobacteria eventually becoming these primates that we eventually evolve from. So that would mean what, people? There is no God. There is no creator. There's just this. There is no purpose to all of this. It's just something that was created out of a supernova, an explosion that happened, and through various climate changes and circumstances, we just so happen to pop into existence as a result of evolution. Can't accept that. That's something I couldn't accept. And when I got to this point, I was stuck. And I remember this. This is one of the hardest things that I was stuck on because it fit. And when you're reading all the books, and all the books are saying the same thing, and it's like, well, wait a minute. Then why y'all tell us about this Bible shit? 1 minute, y'all telling us we just evolved from primates. And then y'all give me this book that's talking about this holy God that created everything. What the fuck is going on? So, to people like me and you, if you really go crazy over information like that and you really got to do research, yeah, that shit had me snapping. So I had to really look. And I dedicated a lot of time to this, to really looking into this, because I wanted to be sure. Because to me, it makes a lot of sense at first, because it explains a lot. It explained the whole thing. Well, this is why we don't see God. This is why no God has came down and did anything, because, we just evolved from nothing. We are so insignificant that whatever the super God that created us don't really give a shit, because, you don't care about the bacteria that's growing on the ocean floor. It can do whatever the hell it wants. I don't even really know it exists or what it look like. So what? I'm so much on a higher scale of existence. Whatever that stuff is doing, I don't care. And little do we know, bacteria on the ocean floor could be going through a whole bunch of political shit that we have no clue about. I mean, I know it sounds crazy, but who knows? In the scheme of things, we're talking about ultra small and huge. So it was something that blew me away, and I couldn't accept it because of the power of the spirit, the soul, consciousness. This is something that is so super advanced. And it just took me, getting some more education to figure out what's going on. And we're going to get into that because I want you guys to know. So evolution is what they tell us, and they stuff the Bible down our throat so we know it's all bullshit. So we got to look at this whole evolutionary scale and see where the problem lies. And of course, it's a problem. It's a major problem when we get into these primates, because when we get into the primates, we look at the evolutionary chart and we can see, you have primates coming, evolving, and basically you have gorillas and chimps still being here on this planet. But then when we get over to Homo Australopithecus, how you pronounce it, I think, this is the big issue right here, because they have a link connecting these two, and that link should not be there. Now we're going to get back into this chart. Now it's because I remember when I got to this point of evolution, I was just thinking about, damn, how smart animals are. And it's like, well, then animals became smart fast. When you think about cyanobacteria, 3.5 billion years of existence. And then all of a sudden they become these super intelligent, organisms. So you have to understand what it takes to become an evolved, complex organism. Now, in order for this bacteria to really evolve, it has to get with the other cyanobacteria and agree to live together, to agree to share food. But the most important part is it had to agree to this complex developmental program, which basically is going to redirect cells to different parts of the body to do specific jobs. Now, when you think about how complex even the animal body is, in our body, we got lungs to breathe and a heart and everything like that, and all kinds of organs, our pancreas, our liver and everything. It's different cells that make up these different organs and everything. So we want to get into that. But this is the type of sophistication that these organisms will have to have in order for it to go from these single cell, eat and poop organisms to something more complex. So we're talking about a long process of evolution that will have to take place, and it will have to take consciousness. They have to take these single cells being conscious of their situation, and they will have to agree to evolve. This is something that's going to take everybody agreeing on, because what's going to have to happen also is they will have to basically kill any bacteria that could not evolve, because you don't want them reproducing organisms that's going to be the same, that's not going to evolve into the new species, because you want evolution to happen, because this is something you would have to really agree to happen. So the thing is, when we look at Pangea, all these animals was wiped out, and 30 million years later you had new animals come into existence. The problem is we're talking about 3.5 billion years of this cyanobacteria in existence. Now, 3.5 billion years, nothing but bacteria. We should not find any life on the planet during that time. And we did. So you had scientists discover these bugs, and they date them to 3.7 billion years ago. So this is before cyanobacteria. Now, even if you want to say maybe the numbers might be off, you got to look at that number. 3.7 billion years was before cyanobacteria. And remember, it still took another billion years or so for life, for basically, something to crawl out of the waters and, begin to walk around. So that's another billion years tacked onto that. You have PBS and CNN doing a story on this, on how they found the fossilized remains of these bugs that existed 3.7 billion years ago. This is a problem. And also, we know our atmosphere cannot really sustain life 2.5 billion years ago. So we shouldn't find really no kind of organism that can crawl around or walk around and live on the surface more than 2.5 billion years ago. And again, if no humans or no kind of intelligent life was walking around on the surface of the planet 2.5 billion years ago, then, who created these? And these spears, they find in South Africa. They date them to about 2.8 billion years. They also found similar spheres in Utah dating 2.5 million years. And we know about the spheres in Costa Rica and also in Bosnia. And we find all over the planet these spheres that don't nobody really know what they are. People thought for one reason it was formed from something naturally, but the lines is what give it away. These, lines around these spheres. Now, it's not 100%, it's supposed to be 100% proven that the age of these spheres, but of course, not everybody agree. But the fact that we find these spheres in so many different places, it's hard for people to just discount them. And, that's a huge number to be, way off of 3.7 billion years. So, I doubt they off a billion years or 500 million years or what have you. Even if they're off a billion years, it's still, it's weird because, something had to create these spheres, and we know it had to be some kind of intelligent life to do that, and no humans was supposed to be here that long ago. So this is something that you have to factor into the whole process when we're looking at everything, and you have to say, well, what the fuck is this? How the hell did these spheres get here? How did these, eat and poop organisms, single cell organisms, they just eat and poop and reproduce. That's all they do. How did they go from these single cell organisms to these complex organisms forming together and creating a plan to evolve? And this is what we're seeing that they had to do, what must have happened in order for them to evolve. They really had to come together and agree to share food. As I said, agree to live together, agree to go through this whole developmental program and have conscious control of their cells, to redirect their cells to do different things throughout the body in order to evolve into these walking around organisms that we see, today. So think about that. Think about the complicity, the complex nature of, such a job. And, we know, as I said, our body has different organs and, our liver, our heart, what have you. And there are cells that make up these, different parts of the body. So for these organisms to go through such a complex evolution is something that if you wanted to do today, again, this is why they give us these numbers, billions of years, and they decided to do this. But if you wanted to do that today, you would have to engineer it in a lab. It's just that simple. So as I said, something had to introduce these organisms to our planet, and the evolution had to took place probably somewhere else, possibly on this planet, but the ingredients had to be put there, or something had to be put in place or introduced, as I said, in order for this evolution to occur. It is highly unlikely that these stupid eat and poop bacteria was able to organize after 3.5 billion years this complex idea to evolve, and to evolve for what? Now, we've been finding fossilized remains of animals going millions and millions of years back. If we evolved from this missing link, we should have by now found its body. We have not. We have not found the body of the missing link. Not just that, when you look at the chart, you see these evolutionary lines. Look at the primates. You see everything that they came from, We not only, as I said, this line should not be here, should be gone, but we not only have a missing link, we don't have the evolutionary line that missing link would have come from. So we know something is up here. Okay, so let's cut straight to the point. Bottom line. Human life was not created here on Earth. It had to be created somewhere else. Now, the DNA that we share with these animals was created here. Earth at some point was terraformed. I believe it was terraformed a couple times, and it was terraformed to create the atmosphere that was needed to create first the animal life and then our life to sustain us. And we were put here for whatever reason. We'll get into, much later. We got a lot to deal with. So they terraformed this planet. So we simply can't believe it just happened here and life was only created here. Now, we talked about in part 1 how Earth used to be possibly used to be one of the moons of Saturn, and how Titan, which is one of the moons of Saturn, also is supposed to be like the planet Earth. When you go and look at Greek mythology, everything involving Greek mythology points to Saturn and its moons. Most of the moons of Saturn is named after Greek gods. We talked about how the ancient Egyptians worshiped Saturn as a sun, not our sun in the sky. So when you look at all the mythology, everything that they're talking about in ancient Kemet is pointing to Saturn as the sun and not the sun in the sky. So you can almost slice the Bible in half. When you have the Old Testament, we know, as I went through before, we know we're talking about Saturn. We're talking about Saturn as a sun. We're talking about Greek mythology. We're talking about the moons of Saturn and everything like that. This is the Old Testament. And then we go into the New Testament, where we're still sort of talking about Saturn, but we're talking about the sun we see today, the sun in the sky, Jesus. We're talking about Saturn as we see it today, but we're also still talking about Saturn as a sun. So when you start getting into the parables of the Bible, you see that this is where it's pointing to. When you start going and looking into secret societies, when you start looking at all the esoteric circles and everything, every single thing points to Saturn. There's no escaping it. There's no way around it. I titled this series, Saturn, Satan, and God, and the Nature of Reality, for a reason, because everything is pointing there. When you go dig into all these mystery schools, it's taking you back to Kemet. And when you study Kemet, you're going to find out about Saturn. You're going to find out about a lot of things. This is by design. So everything seems to be pointing towards Kemet and pointing towards Saturn, except for the dinosaurs. The dinosaurs is pointing towards nothing. You just have these beasts that existed for millions of years, and we don't understand the purpose of their existence, which tells us what? Intelligent life did not begin here on Earth. It's just that simple. It didn't begin here on Earth. This Earth wasn't first prepared for us, but prepared for them, for the dinosaurs and for the animals that was here. It's just that clear. So when you understand that, you understand intelligent life did not begin here. You look at, creation. You look at the woman. And obviously clear, as I talked about, she was put here first. So the thing is, what you really got to ask yourself and you got to think about it is, okay, we can get into, 666 and everything like that, 6 electrons, 6 protons, 6 neutrons, that gives us carbon, that gives us life. We could talk about all that. But, we really just have to take it back to the basic, simple question that we always speak about. If we evolved from primates, as I talked about, how come we are not seeing this evolution now? We are not seeing primates, turn from primates into humans. We're not seeing that. If it's all about 6 electrons, 6 protons, 6 neutrons, 666 and everything like that, if we crawled out of the primordial waters, or whatever you call it, if it's about these elements that came together to create the woman, how come we're not seeing it? We're not seeing women just come into existence out of nowhere. So that tells us that the woman had to be created. She had to be created. It's really going back to that whole saying, as I talked about before, what came first, the chicken or the egg? What came first, the woman or, the baby? And you can't get the baby without the woman, plain and simple. So again, she had to be created. She had to be made. We are not seeing existence of human beings outside the womb of a woman. It's just not happening. We're not seeing men and women come into creation outside the womb of the woman. The woman brings us into this planet. It's something that we all understand and know. So when you really get into it, and it's just, we bombarded by so much, it's stuff that we really don't think about, but we can settle it all right there with just that question. She didn't birth herself. Everything comes into existence. Every human came into existence by a woman. How did she come into existence? She had to be created. It's just that simple. So we can, right there, just by getting that technical, X out evolution.
we can get rid of it. No, we didn't. And I went through all that on YouTube, and I went through all that. That's why I got into this stuff. So when we get to this final part, you will really be able to grasp that we did not come about through evolution. Plain and simple. When you look at the animals, they have a different consciousness. They have a different comprehension. Plain and simple. Billions of insects and animals on the planet. Not one of them has the comprehension of man. And we understand that because, one, you can be driving down the road. Just give you a quick example. And the more you drive, the more roadkill you see. And you have to start thinking to yourself, how stupid can these animals be to not just wait for the cars to go by? I mean, this is your life we're talking about. It's over if you get hit by this car. How dumb can they be, to not just wait till there's absolutely no cars, till they're 100% sure to cross the street? Yet we see countless animals, birds, getting hit by cars, roadkill. We see flies flying right at your car at Mach 10 when you're going down the road, thinking that, your window, they're able to fly right through and come out the back. And, the consciousness of animals does not equal the consciousness of man. So if we evolve as they did, we will have their consciousness. We do not. But it's clear to see that this planet and the animals that are here, or was here too, was used to create these bodies that we have now. It's just that simple. There's no way around it. You can't look at the ape and not see you. I don't care if you're black or white. The hands look exactly like us. We know. We share these genes and we share this DNA, as I got into. So we are a, unique creation in the universe, plain and simple. I don't think people understand how complex our brain alone is, how complex the human body is. A lot of thought went into the creation of us. We are seriously complicated. This is not something that is just put together out of the blue. We are very complex people. And when you think about something, creating something that has to hold this much energy and a consciousness, I mean, it's amazing that they were able to do what they did in our creation. So we understand that we share genes, DNA with animals, and that we also share DNA and genes with whoever our creator is. The thing is, it's really hard to tell exactly where this creation took place, but it obviously didn't take place here on Earth. It had to have taken place somewhere else. So we are told, the Earth is unique, that the Earth is the only planet that can support life, and da-da-da. And then we found out later on that, possibly people live on Mars. There's possibly people living on Titan, which is one of the moons of Saturn. And, of course, the Greek gods, in Greek mythology, the Titans were, in Greek mythology. And a lot of the moons of Saturn are named after those Titans. The Titans were giants. Kronos, the god of Saturn, all that is going into Greek mythology, as I said, not a coincidence. Now, again, I talked about this before, the movie Prometheus. When they go onto that planet, they fly past Saturn and basically land on one of the moons of Saturn, which is where they find out that, aliens created human life. They go into a place that has the atmosphere of Earth, and they find out that these aliens that look, like us, we look like them, created us. And, you can't get much more clear than that and get into the understanding of what that movie is trying to tell us, which is why I use it a lot. And I was shocked at, the fact that they put that movie out the way that they did. It's giving away what a lot of people have already come to realize in esoteric circles a long time ago. As I said, this information is old. It's kindergarten stuff. It's stuff that a lot of people who done their research is going to come to this same conclusion. So for some of you, this information might be like, wow, but this information it's been out here. It's been there. And a lot of people have gotten to that point, which you'll be at the end of this DVD, where you just say, okay, well, I got to learn everything else. There's a lot more to come to it that goes with it, but at least I got to this point where I can understand the situation that's going on, possibly going on here on the planet. So when you step back and start looking at the picture, that we were definitely created and put here on this planet, and everything that, that entails, all the questions that start to pop up when you start dealing with that aspect of us and, our purpose and, why were we created, what's going on and everything like that. Then, all the pieces start to fall into place when you start looking and searching and going back through history and looking at stuff. And as I will show you in this video, and as you will find out through your own research, there are so many different stories, so many different lanes you can go. The only thing you can do is connect the dots and put the pieces together that fit. Because when you get to this level of knowledge and information, when you start getting to this point, the only people that have the 100% true, correct answers, I would say, or the true story, are the powers that be, the people who actually know. As I said, we can only put together where the facts lead us, which is what I have done, and what a lot of people have done. And it's cool because I try to stay away from, this is why I don't really watch too many YouTube videos, where I don't really go into too many other people's stuff. And I find out, through a lot of you guys that, when I'm talking about stuff and I put stuff out, that people always say, well, have you read such and such book? They came to the same conclusion. I go and read the book and I'm like, wow. It validates my research to know that, before I came to this conclusion, somebody else had already came to the conclusion, and it validates my research and lets me know that the path that I was on and looking for all this stuff and try to put together the pieces, I was on the right path blindly, on my own, just trying to figure it out, and was coming to the same conclusion as everybody else. That's validation. That's when you've done right research. You've done research, you followed the breadcrumbs, and it led you to the correct place. So dinosaurs ruled for millions of years during the Triassic, Jurassic, and Cretaceous period. And during that time, while they was ruling, while they was on the earth, there was something going on in the universe. There was Star Wars. So, Star Wars begins a long time ago in the galaxy far, far away. There was, Star Wars. And everything points to it actually being a war in space. So when you go to the Bible, remember the Bible talks about the war in heaven. And, what is heaven? The heavens is basically space, as I talked about before. We understand that the heavens is space. Even when you go into Genesis and read about the firmament and everything like that, it's giving you the hint that the heavens is basically space. So there was this war. Everything points to this war happening. And in the Bible, we know, Satan fought the war, and he was basically banished to earth because of the war and everything like that. And when you understand esoterically who Satan is, esoterically, Satan represents us black people. Now, Satan has many aspects, of course.
But, we got to remember the ancient world, and we got to really think about what we seeing, with the ruins and everything. So it's clear as day there was an advanced civilization that existed back then. And, when we look at the pyramids and the ruins that we see all over the world, something like the Great Pyramid, the way we know it today wasn't just built to be, what we see today, a monument just sitting there. There was a function for it, as well as with all the other pyramids around the world. So we know it was a advanced civilization that existed, and they accomplish a lot. And, we get to a point in history where everything just falls off. We get back to the ancient Egyptians, we look at the Sumerians, and we scratching our heads as to what the hell happened. Something happened, and we know something happened on this planet that is explained in the ancient world. And it's so deep. And the reason why it really eludes us is because the truth about it is really hard to fathom, as you'll see in this video. It's hard to digest, it's deep, and it's a lot of information to get into, but it's pertaining to Saturn. And we got to go back and look at all the information about Saturn and the planets and what these different civilizations who all had, so many things in common, who talked about the same things before, organized religion. What was this all about? Now, it's tough for us to comprehend because we can only comprehend, life as we know it. And that's the thing right there. You got to really think about that. We hear them say all the time, this planet has, no life as we know it,
Life as we know it does not exist on this planet. And that's life as we know it. So that doesn't mean we know all life. We don't understand how something could survive in those conditions, but we don't know all life. We don't know all that exists. And this is based off of, machines and computer systems and what's there that can read the planets and actually try to calculate what could possibly live there. But that's based on life as we know it. So this is about to get real deep. We're going to get into this video. So now, the ancient Egyptians talk about life before, the flood. They talk about the old ones and people that existed before them, and they allude to something happening. This is something that we see in a lot of other civilizations where they give us the flood story, and it's all about life before the flood. So now we got to look at it and understand the golden age of man. This is a big deal that we're going to get into, and what the golden age of man was about. The golden age of man was basically understanding the Garden of Eden and what took place before the so-called fall of man, where they, supposedly deceived God. Now, you had bliss. Everything was fine. And that's what they're alluding to in the Bible, where you have, Adam was 930 when he died. So he lived a long time. It's giving you this whole understanding that, there was peace in the garden. Remember, you just eat. There was no death. There was no pain. There was nothing. And then when you go and look at the ancient civilizations talking about this same stuff, they're saying the same thing, that this is a peaceful time. Everybody was eating. They had celebrations. There was no death. There was none of the stuff, no wars, nothing. This is the golden age of man. All right. And then we know something happened to where man fell. And this is what the Bible gets into in Genesis, where we have this, fall of man. And then, we have this whole situation with Adam and Eve. And then they go out and create the people, create us or what have you. And we see what happened to where, sons of God coming to the daughters of men. And we get these giants and everything like that. So we got to understand that the golden age of man is basically up into the flood. And we know there was the war and everything like that. Well, basically what was happening with these beings defying God and being evil and so on and so forth. But this is allegorical. This is a story to really get you to understand what's really taking place here and what's really going on. So now when we read about Hesiod and the Diogenes and what Homer talked about in the Iliad, the Odyssey, they're alluding to, they're talking about the golden age of man, talking about the gods, and there's so much mythology wrapped up in it to give you this understanding. Now, during this golden age, during this time, as I talked about before, Saturn was the sun. It's what all the ancient civilizations are talking about. They're not talking about the sun we know of today. They're talking about Saturn as the sun. Now, right here it says, Saturn is the source of much occult speculation with many theories surrounding it. This will be both a history and an expansion of the enigmatic entity known as Saturn. Saturn was our first sun, the sun of the golden age. In Japanese, Saturn is called Dusei. Dusei is what they say, which means earth star. Many of the sun gods of ancient history are linked not to our current sun, but to the original sun, to Saturn. In many ancient records, Saturn was referred to as the sun. For example, the ancient Babylonian text describes Saturn as the ghost of the sun. Maya believed that the sun that we see today was different in former times. The Saturn Myth, 1980, is a book by David Talbert which proposes that ancient myths and traditions describe the planet Saturn as the dominant celestial body in the sky, appearing fixed at the north celestial pole. A number of other writers, sometimes called Saturnists, have described similar scenarios which have collectively been described as the Saturn theory, or Saturn model, or Saturn thesis. In the book, Saturn, the Ancient God of the Sun, author David Talbert notes an obvious mismatch between Saturn and the Sun in ancient times, and that this mismatch could not be a coincidence. Talbert argues that different figures throughout history deliberately distinguish Saturn from our Sun, calling it the best sun, the original sun, the central sun. In his book, Talbert contends that the evidence assembled in the following pages indicates that within human memory, Extraordinary changes in the planetary system occurred. In the earliest age recalled by man, the planet Saturn was the most spectacular light in the heavens, and its impact on the ancient world overwhelming. In fact, Saturn was the one great god invoked by all mankind. The first religious symbols were symbols of Saturn. Saturn was named after the Roman god of agriculture and harvest, while the planet may have gotten its name from its golden color, like a field of wheat. It also had to do with its position in the sky. So as I've shown you guys many ancient depictions of Saturn, of the planet having two suns, we've seen it before. It's all over the place. It's wrapped up in so much mythology and so much symbolism that a lot of people don't recognize it. They think they're seeing two suns. They don't understand one is Saturn. But that's one of the things we got to do. We got to distinguish and separate the mythology, the mythology from the parables, from the allegories, from the esoteric stuff, and the truth, because it's all mixed up, and it's done so for a reason. A lot of the parables are overlapping. So how we have the Noah's Ark story, but we also have the Book of Enoch, in that story. So there's a lot of overlapping tales, even in the Bible itself, but it's all, mixed up, and it's done this way for a reason, to mumble your mind. And if you're not deep into your studies, you're going to be lost, but you're going to get a lot of clarity in this video. So in Genesis, God creates the earth. And because of this, we exist. And it's one of the hard things you got to do. You got to really go back and try to, separate your mind from those times and look at, you got to be critical, because now we're looking in the Bible, and you got to realize that this is a time where it's talking about worship, but there is no religion. There is no biblical books. There is no religion. So you got to think back to ancient times, and who could they possibly be worshiping? What are they worshiping during this time? So the Bible, you have God going out there and killing people, and so much worship is going on. The whole thing the Israelites are doing is about stopping these people or taking the lands away from these people who are worshiping these gods. And that's basically the skirmish that's going on. So who or what is being worshipped back then? We look at the ancient Greeks and the ancient Romans, and we understand what they worshiped and what was being worshipped during this time. We know about paganism and worship of nature and everything like that. But as far as the stories, what was being put out, what was they worshiping? And we got to understand, as I said, the golden age of man ended with the flood. This is the flood we can't deny happened, because everybody's talking about it. This is stuff outside of biblical religion, which is where they got it from. So, golden age ends with the flood. And the Bible is trying to tell us something, like, something happened. And it's telling us about, these evil people and so-called Nephilim or what have you, and God basically having to destroy the world. But you got to look deeper into that, because it's telling us that something happened. And because this happened, they had to start all over. But it's important, because we can't mix up what's being worshipped in the Bible with what's being worshipped in history as we know it. So we know back then, the ancient Greeks, the ancient Romans was worshiping the planets. The planets was called gods, and they basically made these mythologies off of these planets and turned them into, beings, right? So we have this worship, and we got to understand that for the real part of it, where we at, the us side. Then we have the biblical side, and we have the story with Noah's Ark, right? So Noah's Ark, we know the story. And now we got to get into the esoteric part of it, which is not in the Bible. It's in the Book of Enoch. So it says, the Book of Enoch, Black Adam, albino Noah, in the image of God. Was everyone on the planet black before Noah's flood? The Book of Enoch seems to indicate that the world before Noah's flood was a much darker place, as far as melanin is concerned. While the Book of Enoch is not considered canon, official scripture, it was very important to the ancient Hebrews. In fact, it was so important that they hid it among the Dead Sea Scrolls at Qumran. Let's start by looking at the story concerning Noah's birth. After a time, my son Methuselah took a wife for his son Lamech. She became pregnant by him and brought forth a child, the flesh of which was white as snow. I'll start right there. Now, it's giving us a lot in this story. So you have God basically saying, we're going to create the white man. Then we're going to destroy the world and start all over. And, we got different accounts of this. And, we got Deucalion Fair with the Greeks. We got the Epic of Gilgamesh, which we'll get into. And it's telling us about, in Book of Enoch, God creating this mutation and God creating this flood. And this flood story is heard, around the world. And it's something that we really got to look at because it's deep as it pertains to Saturn. So we have Roman mythology, we have Greek mythology, and it basically telling us the same thing with, basically different names. So you have in Roman mythology, we have Jupiter, and Jupiter is God. And you have Zeus in Greek mythology, he's basically Jupiter. And we have Zeus Ammon, as I showed you guys. We also have Jupiter Ammon. And the whole thing is, Jupiter is a planet. We know that. So what is it talking about? We have these stories, this mythology, and they're basically putting these planets, these beings into, human form or, God form, looking like men and giving us these stories. And it's one of the things that just, we don't know no better. We're just thinking like, okay, is this stuff really happening out there? Is this dude really existing? Is a dude Jupiter that's all powerful? Or is it talking about planets, this esoteric? What is going on? What is it alluding to? And that's the thing. What is it talking about with Jupiter being a god, Zeus being a god? What is it really about? And that's one of the things that they don't really elab on. And you got to get deep into the story, which the stories is kind of mixed up and it's giving you different representations. But this is important. Jupiter is the biggest key, to understanding the Saturn mythology. So the Bible tells us Satan was cast out. Saturn, Satan, right? And we know there was a war in heaven. And the thing we got to understand, this war is between Jupiter and Saturn. So I'm going to read this little part again. It says Saturn was our first sun, the sun of the golden age. In Japanese, Saturn is called Dusei, which means Earth star. Many of the sun gods of ancient history are linked not to our current sun, but to the original sun, to Saturn. During this time, Mars flourished with life. It was a golden age on the three realms, Earth, Mars, and Venus. Venus was not baked by the heat of the sun, and Mars was no longer frozen. The solar system instead revolved around Saturn. The alchemical symbol for sun and gold is Saturn. Saturn is now a god of death, a god of harvest, and the god of time. When he ruled the skies, the world was perfect. Nothing aged or changed. It was eternally summer. Then the sons of Saturn overthrew him, seeking to rule the world themselves, and so they imprisoned their father. This is a complicated scenario because despite the convoluted symbolism, Saturn is not evil. In fact, it is his son, Jupiter, who creates man and seeks to imprison his father, ending the age of paradise. In this sense, Jupiter takes on the personification of the demiurge. If you know about Gnosticism, you know about the demiurge. Saturn has been sealed away. This was done by his power-hungry children, the race who lived on Olympus Mons on Mars. And Olympus Mons is actually a thing on Mars. They stole his power and sealed him away inside a black cube, a material prison. This is why a lot of the people conflate cubes with Saturn. It's his prison. So Jupiter becomes the demiurge or the demiurge, however you want to pronounce it. Jupiter is the demiurge. What is the demiurge? And it says here, a being responsible for the creation of the universe. In Platonic philosophy, the maker or creator of the world. That's important. In Gnosticism and other theological systems, a heavenly being subordinate to the supreme being that is considered to be the controller of the material world and antagonistic to all that is purely spiritual. Think about that. Opposed to anything that is purely spiritual. Antagonistic. This is the demiurge. And it's important to understand a little bit of Gnosticism. We got into that, and I think with Saturn, Satan 3 or 2, where we talked about the Book of Enoch. We got into a lot of this stuff, and it's going to make sense. So now, real quick, just understand, we're talking about golden age. Saturn is the sun, right? Now you have to try to bounce back and forth between mythologies and the Bible. It's crazy how this was put. It's like a code, and they knew what they was doing. You got to bounce back and forth, and you have this whole mystery with Saturn, and then you have these stories, the mythologies that's out there, that's just basically telling you exactly what happened, but in these forms to where we don't really listen to them seriously because it's like kid stories almost, but embedded in these stories, it's giving you the information that's going to make the Bible make sense and make a lot of these stories, make sense. So we have this golden age of man, and we have this fallen man, and then we have this flood, and everything changes after the flood. When you pay attention, everything's completely different. So the Bible gives us, this story, and, we have this whole war in heaven. And as I said, the war is between Jupiter and Saturn. So Saturn is being worshipped in the ancient world. That's in real life. Saturn is being worshipped in the ancient world. And remember, Saturn is Rumphian in the Bible. So the Bible is telling us, hey, you took up the god, tabernacle of Moloch and his god Rumphian and so on and so forth. And these people are being butchered and killed for worshiping Saturn, which is Rumphian in the Bible. So we have this real Saturn worship that's going on. And we have this Saturn worship is telling us, in the Bible. And we just read that Jupiter is the demiurge, right? So we understand Saturn is Satan. We're going to get into that a little bit more if you don't understand. Saturn is Satan. So we just read that Jupiter is the demiurge, right? And how do you become a demiurge? To be a demiurge, you have to be a creator god. You have to have created the world. So Jupiter created this planet. And it says here in Scientific American, a new study, however, suggests that without Jupiter, Earth itself might not exist either. Where this and the other rocky planets now orbit, there may have first been a previous generation of worlds destined to be bigger, gas-shrouded, utterly uninhabitable orbs. But Jupiter came swinging in, clearing the way for small worlds like Earth by destroying those older planets. The study, co-authored by California Institute of Technology, Planetary scientists, whatever. Now it says here, it is understood, and this is from David Topper, it is understood that Velikovsky believed the Earth and Saturn to have once moved in close proximity, with the Earth perhaps revolving as a Saturnian moon. The Saturn myth proposes that Saturn, fixed at the celestial pole, loomed massively overhead a central sun venerated by all mankind. Evidence is presented there for a Saturnian polar configuration as the source of early civilization's dominant symbols. Velikovsky believed and argued that Jupiter and Saturn were most likely part of the binary system of stars because of the outstanding position of Saturn in the ancient world. As Velikovsky claimed, Saturn was probably closer to Earth and more of Jupiter at the time. So now understand, saying here, did the Great Flood actually occur? An already open question for today's disputes. According to Velikovsky's research, he did not just happen. This did not just happen. But also through the fall of Saturn and his giant space neighbor Jupiter. In the above mentioned book, Worlds in Collision, Velikovsky argued that Saturn and Jupiter came very close to each other, being on orbital paths that differed from the current ones. And then it was supposed that two bodies, such as Jupiter and Saturn, came close together, causing severe perturbations and powerful tidal effects in the atmosphere. Being a system of binary double stars, they could interact to such an extent that they would lead to a stellar explosion. Velikovsky suggested that an event placed the planets in the place that we see today and launched a chain of events that resulted in a flood on the Earth. People that remembered early tragedies enacted in the sky by the heavenly bodies asserted that Jupiter drove Saturn away from its place in the sky before Jupiter Zeus became the chief god. Saturn, Kronos, occupied the celestial throne. In all ancient religions, the dominion passes from Saturn to Jupiter. So now you just go back Let's look at Genesis. Genesis, God created the earth. So who created the earth? What created the earth? God. What was it telling you? Jupiter. Just read to you. Jupiter. Because of Jupiter, the earth was created. So in the beginning, God created the earth. Jupiter. So then what happened? You had something happen on the planet and God got pissed and caused the flood. But what caused the flood? Jupiter. Now you gotta bounce back and forth between stories. In the mix of this, what's supposed to have taken place? Saturn, which is Satan, fell. There was a war in heaven. Just told you, Jupiter and Saturn. So the fall of Saturn is the fall of Satan, caused by God. God is who? Jupiter. Jupiter caused Saturn to fall as being a star. It's telling you what Saturn is Satan. And then again, Jupiter causes this flood. Who causes the flood in the Bible? God. It's Jupiter it's talking about. And it says here, in alchemy, Saturn symbolizes lead, which is the base form of gold. This is to symbolize the fall of Saturn, who was once a golden sun, but has been reduced to base materials. Understand what it's saying? Base materials. This is the tale of two suns. As Saturn's energy is siphoned away by Jupiter, it is shot out like bolts of plasmic lightning. Zeus, Jupiter, lightning bolts. Some say these hit a planet, which then becomes the sun as it explodes into life. Others that these sparks of divine essence from the new sun on their own. So now understand, Jupiter is the son of Saturn. As he said, he was taken down by his sons. Jupiter is the son of Saturn. But, you have now, this conundrum. Where does this come from? And it's basically giving you, what it's talk about in Gnosticism, where you have Jupiter being the son of Saturn and Jupiter being God, the creator of this world. Where do we see this? We see this with the Demiurge and Sophia. Sophia creates the Demiurge. You understand? So we have Saturn creating Jupiter, which created this world, son of Saturn. And then we have with Sophia creating the Demiurge, which the Demiurge in Gnosticism created this world, trapped us in flesh. What happened with Saturn? They trapped him in the cube, which is materialism. So this is all symbolism. It's going to make a lot of sense if it don't already. We have the same thing with Mary. And as you can see with this book here, that's what they're trying to allude to. But you also have with Saturn, the Satan aspect, which for, with Sophia, that would be the Demiurge. And we would look at the Demiurge as being, evil. And then we go back and look at, well, wait a minute. How do you tie this together with Jupiter? If Jupiter created the earth, which we're here because of that, then that means God is evil. So then you got to understand and look back. Well, wait a minute. So we had a golden age where everything was going great. And that was under Saturn. So how can Saturn be Satan and the evil one? So then you start to understand Satanism and why the occult is, this way, and why all of the Saturn worship, which is deeper than this. So again, we know, as talked about before, Jesus is Satan. Broke it down, as he says, I am the bright and morning star, giving you the understanding that he is Satan. And then also you have Jesus being Saturn. If you don't understand that yet, Jesus is Saturn as well. And there's a lot of information on this. So, you got to look at this, start tying it together. It's a lot of information, but it's giving you the ancient worship. And if you don't understand the stories, it's hard for you to, put this stuff together. This is why I say to people, you got to study. So the more you study, the more you can put this stuff together. And it's going to reveal itself to you because you're going to know so much. But we got to look at the symbolism. And you got Jesus with the halo. That halo, 360 degrees. It's a circle. It's representing the rings of Saturn, 666, 360. And also, we have Saturn. Osiris is also Saturn. And that's a big deal to understand. And it's the same stories. And a lot of people are not going to understand these stories unless you get into the mythologies. But again, this stuff can only be found in books. It's going to be hard to find a lot of this information because they hide it in books. And it says here, in Egyptian mythology, Osiris is tied to Saturn. Osiris is murdered by Set and his body is cut into 14 pieces. Isis, the wife of Osiris, can only find 13. She recreates the 14th piece, his phallus, his penis, out of gold. Understand that anytime you've seen gold, gold is representing Saturn as a sun, and brings Osiris back to life by sinking his sarcophagus in the Nile. And that's a representation to the flood. But there's a problem. Osiris cannot yet return to the world of the living, and so instead he rules from beyond the veil for now, while his son, and notice how you spell it, son, Horus, who is linked to the sun, rules in his place. So then you got to start making this connection and understanding this spiritual being, because this is what we're talking about when we talk about the golden age. It's the time of spirituality, plain and simple. And then now, because things have changed, so with Jupiter coming in and doing what it did and changing the configuration of the planets, it's more to it, but giving you the esoteric part of it. This is what caused the fall of man, plain and simple. And it's what changed everything, because Saturn was a different sun, and Saturn had us activated. It basically was the reason why people lived so long and everything was great. It's giving you the golden age. So you got to understand the people who talking about, Saturn is evil, Satan is evil. They're not understanding what we're talking about. During this time under the age of Saturn, which would be Satan, everything was great. There was no war. There was no death. There was no hunger. There was nothing but bliss, peace. How could that be evil? It would be Jupiter coming in, which would be the son of Saturn, and changing things and trapping us in this flesh. And, what happened. But then you got to come out of the mythology and just go into real life, as I've talked about. What happened? We had the Egyptians. It seemed after this event happened, people started emerging. This changed everything. There wasn't no poles, no freezing cold. Understand? So it was different. That's what paradise means. Paradise is, tropical, nice. Don't get me wrong. I do like the cold and the snow once in a while, but, I wouldn't mind being at the beach all the time. But this is, paradise, and Jupiter changed that. And that's what it's getting into. So, you got to know how to break that down. But we have Osiris, and we have this whole connection. The story was set. He basically made a wooden box to the specifications of Osiris, and basically had a little game to where whoever could fit in the box, has the prize, whatever. But it's basically Osiris's coffin, which he goes in and put in the Nile, which is symbology of the flood story. So you go to the Epic of Gilgamesh, and Utnapishtim, remember, he had to create a huge cube. There you go. A huge cube to basically save mankind. You look at the depictions, it's giving you Noah's Ark, but in a big ass cube. And then you'll also see the many comparisons of Utnapishtim's, that crazy name, his cube and Noah's Ark, the measurements. So you have that, and you have Osiris connection with that, and you can see how it all goes together. And it's giving you Cyrus as Saturn, but it's also giving you the flood story, and it's giving you Saturn with the cube. And this cube is everywhere. If you're into this information, you've seen it before. And to people, it's just ridiculous because they don't understand the symbolism of it. They just say, well, a cube, like how you going to fit everything in a cube? It don't make sense. That story's off. But, it's not. It's really giving you, what you need to understand as far as connecting the dots of the Epic of Gilgamesh to Saturn. So we can make that connection, Osiris with the Epic of Gilgamesh, the cube, Saturn. And it's the same thing with Jesus. We made the connection with Jesus and Saturn. And just like we had with Jesus supposed to return, it's the same thing with Osiris. They have a story where Osiris returning, where he's going to judge everybody in the underworld, which we all know with the Book of the Dead. But it says here, the sun we have now still has echoes of Saturn. Horus is the son of Osiris and rules in his stead. He is the reincarnation of his father. The sun passes through the underworld every night and is reborn. This is the cycle of time, which was created when Saturn fell. The Egyptian myth speaks of the return of Osiris at the end of the world, where he will rise from the underworld at the final judgment, where he weighs the heart of every man against a feather. But we've seen this. So it's the same thing. And it's, again, how you can tie Jesus into the whole thing, because remember, Jesus is supposed to return. But then it tells you, Book of Revelations, about the return of New Jerusalem, which is supposed to be what? In a giant fucking cube that's golden. This is the return of Saturn, just like Osiris is giving you the return of Osiris. There's supposed to be the return, the resurrection of Saturn, the return of Jesus, New Jerusalem, so on and so forth. This is giving you so much information in this. And we sped right through this video. But, it's a lot of information. If you understand what I just put out here is deep, and, get your study on and watch this again if you have to, and connect those dots to your understanding. But think about that. That all ties in. So, what is it all about? What is it really talking about? As I said, the world was different. You had, as the Egyptians talked about, they was able to leave the physical body and go travel the spiritual world, to go out, travel planet to planet. And you got to understand how things was set up. And, back then they called them the realms, which, we all understand realms. And, the realms is, like, we got to really think about, as I said, life as we know it. That's all we know is this. We can't fathom or understand how things could have been and what was the point of this. But we also don't know why things was changed and who really changed them. And let's just keep it real. Whoever did is God. Is the most powerful thing we know that exists. And it was done for a reason. There is no way around that. You got to really understand what I just, explained, and how it all ties into real, reality and real history that we got to look at. This happened during a time where man exists, where men was walking around, and we observed it, black and white. It was observed. The Romans, talked about Saturnalia, and we talk about the worship of Jupiter. It's huge. And you got to understand, a lot of times you see Zeus, you're seeing Jupiter. And, it's tough to differentiate until you go and read, who it actually is. But Saturnia still exists. The cult of Saturn still exists. And it seems as if everybody is pushing for Saturn. Talked about all the corporations with the Saturn logos. And we see all the Saturn worship everywhere. But why is it Saturn, which is supposed to be Satan? And now you understand why the music industry is satanic and everybody is Satan, Satan, Satan. And you got people on YouTube who have videos who basically giving you the same information, but they're saying, hey, no, this is all bullshit. They're not even talking about Jupiter. They're just saying the Bible. Like, they'll have all this information I just gave you and still not be able to connect the dots that the Bible is esoteric. It's giving you, a bunch of runaround parables, allegorical stories. They still can't even take it and understand that it's not real. But they know all this stuff I just told you. Seeing a lot of videos like that. But it's telling you straight up that this is what's taking place. And these people are not waiting for the return of some Jesus. Well, the biblical one, but the esoteric one, yeah. And that would be Saturn. And that would be Saturn coming back as a sun. And that's the thing I've been getting into and telling you guys about, and understanding why stuff is happening the way that it is. And how that pertains to us is deep, because we're talking about a spiritual age, but we're also talking about a physical age. But now we got to up that physicality. And that's what this shit is about. Because before, whatever happened. Something happened. And it had to do probably with, some type of, because you got to think about it. And they're giving you that understanding of trapping Saturn and material. So now we're just material. The spiritual we don't see until we sleep. The dream world, we don't have the access to it that we once had. We're locked off. Whereas everything is dualistic that we do, except for us in this material world. That's it. We go to sleep. It's the only time we're material. We're spiritual. But our daily lives is one. We're just this physical being dealing with physical reality, which makes this place hell. So something was done. And as I talk about, our DNA was locked. It was changed. A lot of us is locked away. I've studied our DNA deeply. And then, the whole thing, as I talked about before with the, where the races of people come from, when we look at the chimp DNA, and we definitely, from them, we have so many animal parts. We have a lot of that is within us. But you got to understand that
their DNA is basically locked off. And this is why we haven't seen them evolve or change in any way. Ours is not. Our DNA is basically the same until we get to that end point, to the end of it, of the double helix. And theirs is cut off where ours can keep going. The coding is there for it to expand. And that's basically what it's all about. It's like the programming is there for us to unlock what's been locked. But, how the fuck do we do that? So all of this is wrapped up in biblical religion. And all of religions, when you really understand, it's getting into this. But, how do we do this? What is this stuff really going to as far as, spirituality part of it? But I'm going to read here. Mythologically, the planet spirit also corresponds to the Jewish Christian god Jehovah, Kronos Saturn. The stern god in the Paradise Golden Age tries to preserve spiritual life by preventing the personal ego from prematurely separating itself. At the end of the first races, it devours its children, that is, personal egos, back into an undifferentiated unity until the right time has come for them to go ahead. When separation, differentiation finally prevails, then there's the severe and solemn warning from the Saturnian Lord, who sends Adam, their root race, away from the garden and into the hard world of dualistic life. Saturn has many names. In Isis Unveiled, which is H.P. Blavatsky, we read Adabath, the son of darkness and the creator of the material world, was made to inhabit the planet Saturn, which identifies him still more with the Jewish Jehovah, who was Saturn himself, according to the Ophites, and is by them denied his Semitic name. From Adabath emanates 6 spirits who respectively dwell with their father in the 7 planets. These 7 planets are, as Blavatsky explains in the same paragraph, Saturn, Mars, Sun, Moon, Jupiter, Mercury, and Venus, the same celestial bodies that form the mythic ladder to heaven, and that's Jacob's ladder, which we'll get into in a second. HPB, Helena Petrola Blavatsky, acknowledged Saturn as the king of the golden age. In many different traditions, there is a direct relationship between the awakening of the higher mind and the emergence of golden ages. In Buddhism and other religions, gold or yellow is a symbol of divine consciousness. Any golden age is an age of Buddhamanas, which I talked about in Buddhism, or spiritual intelligence, and there is a direct connection between this higher mind and Saturn. Now, Jacob's ladder, this is what it's alluding to. The story of Jacob's ladder is an ancient allegorical biblical tale describing the alchemical process of reaching complete gnosis, or what some may call sainthood, Buddhahood, or enlightenment. A symbolic ladder that we all must climb if we wish to reach the spiritual heights of the divine and the heavens while we are encased in physical matter here on earth. As we climb, we must purify ourselves, our thoughts, habits, and actions so that we may reach the 7th and final step of our ascent in order to activate all of our 7 senses and DNA. Homer, the Greek author in both the Iliad and the Odyssey, who is revered as the greatest of ancient Greek epic poets, has described Jacob's ladder as Jupiter's chain reaching from heaven to earth as it relates to the divine providence. Stop right there. So it's deep. And this is about, again, I always talk about meditation and unlocking that subconscious part of you, which for us men would be the feminine aspect of our subconscious mind, and for the women would be the masculine part. And to do that, this is where so much comes into play with our everyday life that is, convoluted and distorted with our culture. And, we stray away from it. And that's by design, because I don't want nobody getting really close to this right now because the plan is in play. But the best way to do this is with your significant other, having that female next to you, having that male next to you. When you destroy that relationship and you corrupt that, you corrupting yourself. If you're evil against women, evil against men, you're corrupting that spiritual energy within you. It is a unbelievable, amazing thing to have that connection of both. And this is one of the reasons why the, so-called Antichrist, Dajjal, Satan, all that stuff is more, has a liking for homosexuals or what have you, lesbian homosexuals, because it's the representation of that dualistic energy of masculine and feminine, which is basically God.